No Statue of Liberty ever greeted our arrival in this country. We did not, in fact, come to the United States at all. The United States came to us. Luis Valdez. Yes, I am Irish and Indian, which would be the coolest blend in the world if my parents were around to teach me how to be Irish and Indian. But they're not here and haven't been for years, so I'm not really Irish or Indian. I am a blank sky, a human solar eclipse. Sherman Alexie. The true Indian sets no price upon either his property or his labor. His generosity is limited only by his strength and ability. He regards it as an honor to be selected for difficult or dangerous service and would think it shameful to ask for any reward, saying rather, let the person I serve express his thanks according to his own bringing up and his sense of honor. Each soul must meet the morning sun, the new sweet earth, and the great silence alone. What is silence? It is the great mystery. The holy silence is his voice. Charles Alexander, Ohisa, Eastman. A significant number of people believe tribal people still live and dress as they did 300 years ago. During my tenure as principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, national news agencies requesting interviews sometimes asked if they could film a tribal dance or if I would wear traditional tribal clothing for the interview. I doubt they asked the President of the United States to dress like a pilgrim for an interview. Wilma Mankiller. We didn't have last names before they came. When they decided they needed to keep track of us, last names were given to us, just like the name Indian itself was given to us. These were attempted translations and botched Indian names, random surnames, and names passed down from white American generals, admirals, and colonels, and sometimes troop names, which were sometimes just colors. Tommy Orange. Tourists came around and looked into our teepees. That those were the homes we choose to live in didn't bother them at all. They untied the door, opened the flap, and barged right in, touching our things, poking through our bedrolls, inspecting everything. It boggles my mind that tourists feel they have the God-given right to intrude everywhere. Russell Means, where white men fear to tread. Life is a walking, a journey. So, if life upon Mother Earth is a journey, there are two ways to walk. We can choose to walk forward or we can choose to walk backward. Forward walking choices are rewarded with consequences that light the way to peace, happiness, joy, comfort, knowledge, and wisdom. Backward walking choices bring to the two-legged beings consequences of misery, despair, and darkness. Anasazi Foundation. They ravaged neither the rivers nor the forest, and if they irrigated, they took as little water as would serve their needs. The land and all that it bore they treated with consideration, not attempting to improve it. They never desecrated it. Willa Cather, death comes for the Archbishop. We did not think of the great open plains, the beautiful rolling hills and the winding streams with tangled growth, as wild. Only to the white man was nature a wilderness, and only to him was the land infested with wild animals and savage people. To us it was home. Earth was beautiful and we were surrounded with the blessings of the great mystery. Chief Standing River of the Lakota Paul Goebel, Dream Wolf. To the untutored sage, the concentration of population was the prolific mother of all evils, moral no less than physical. He argued that food is good, while surfeit kills, that love is good, but lust destroys, and not less dreaded than the pestilence following upon crowded and unsanitary dwellings was the loss of spiritual power inseparable from too close contact with one's fellow men. Charles Alexander, Ohisa, Eastman. But I know somebody must be thinking about us, because if they weren't we'd just disappear, just like those Indians who used to climb the pueblos. Those Indians disappeared with food still cooking in the pot and air waiting to be breathed, and they turned into birds or dust or the blue of the sky or the yellow of the sun. There they were, and suddenly they were forgotten for just a second, and for just a second nobody thought about them, and then they were gone. Sherman Alexie, The Lone Ranger and Tonto Fist Fight in Heaven. 4 years after the American Revolution, the public opposed to the creation of police departments, fearing that they would become forces of repression. Only in the mid-19th century, after the growth of industrial cities and a rash of urban riots, after the dread of the so-called dangerous classes surpassed the dread of the state, did police departments emerge in the United States. S.C. Gwynn. He was deeply susceptible, moreover, to that singular spell which the wilderness lays upon certain lonely natures, and he loved the wild solitudes with a kind of romantic passion that amounted almost to an obsession. The life of the backwoods fascinated him, whence, doubtless, his surpassing efficiency in dealing with their mysteries. Algernon Blackwood. Although she lived in town, old Tallow was so isolated by the force and strangeness of her personality that she could have been surrounded by a huge dark forest. She had never had any children, and each of her 3 husbands had slunk off in turn during the night, never to be seen again. Nobody knew exactly what it was that Tallow, in her younger days, had done to drive them off. It had probably been something terrible. After the last husband left, her face seemed to have gotten old suddenly, though the rest of her hadn't weakened. She was a rangy woman over 6 feet in height. She was powerful, lean, and lived surrounded by ferocious animals, more wolf than dog. Louise Erdrich. If I'm going to die, I want to fight. I've been fighting the colonizers' whispers that I am not wanted here, not worthy of protection, nothing but a body to be pummeled and played with and threatened into submission. I have not died yet. My whole body is afire, lit back when the world was complete, never extinguished by anybody. Elissa Washuta. Something about it will make sense. The bullet's been coming from miles. Years. Their sounds will break the water in our bodies, tear sound itself, rip our lives in half. The tragedy of it all will be unspeakable, the fact that we've been fighting for decades to be recognized as present tense people, modern and relevant, alive, only to die in the grass wearing feathers. Tommy Orange. The casino was at the center of a constellation of transactions. I saw fishermen come to fish the lake, a woman looking for a job, elders cracking crab legs at the casino buffet, one of 2 restaurants on the reservation that served breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and a steady flow of men in suits. One morning, I watched a tour bus disgorge 100 elderly passengers and learned they had come from a senior center in Bismarck. They were among the few patrons I saw come solely for the slots. The other gamblers were oil workers and tribal members, many of whom lived in the lodge. Sierra Crane Murdoch. As historian Theda Perdue and anthropologist Jack Campisi have noted separately, the closing of all Indian schools created a crisis for southeastern Indians. When institutions like the East Carolina Indian School in Sampson County, North Carolina, locked its doors, a symbol of Indian pride, independence, and identity was closed as well. Despite the negative publicity surrounding integration, some silver lining soon appeared. The loss of schools prompted many groups to establish formal tribal entities in place of old Board of Education and related committees. Mark Edwin Miller. I firmly believe that American society would not endure 10 years if subjected to half the trials and tortures we put natives through. And yet native peoples have not been utterly destroyed, not by the world's strongest military. They have not been totally assimilated, not by the world's largest religion. Native religions are indeed concerned with being a good person, respecting one's family, ancestors, community, and the earth, and when these principles are lived, there is great strength. Israel Morrow. In those days the Pimas always had plenty. The Papagos who lived in the desert south of us did not have a river like the Gila to water their fields, and their food was never plentiful. During the summer months, some of them would come to our village, with cactus syrup put up in little ollas, and salt, and we would give them beans and corn in exchange. The only salt we had came from the Papagos. At a certain time of the year they would go down to the ocean and get the salt from the shore where the tide left the water to dry. It was a kind of ceremony with them. They always felt that we gave them more than they could give us, although to get the salt they had walked hundreds of miles to the ocean and back. And so they would stay with us for a few days and help us harvest our wheat.